Coming up on this special edition of Colorado Unsolved, we take a look back at some of Colorado's most notorious cold cases.
There was blood in the curb. There was a cigarette butt, I remember, that was laying in the blood.
Where they stand today.
This is every article that has ever been put out on Peggy Hetrick. I keep them. I'm possessed with this case, I guess.
The DNA technology that's helping detectives bring people to justice.
Most of what we do is called investigative genetic genealogy.
And giving families the closure they've searched for, sometimes for decades. Colorado Unsolved starts right now. There are roughly 1,700 cold cases right now in Colorado. Some go back decades. Over the years, 9 News has done a series called Colorado Unsolved, looking back at some of the most notorious cold cases in our state. We start this special by taking a look back at some of the cases we've previously featured on Unsolved. Closure and justice, 2 words often used, both important in the healing process, both hard to come by. We've profiled 10 murder cases previously as part of our Unsolved series, going back to 2017, and since, a handful of them have been solved. One is Patricia Louise Smith, a 50-year-old woman who was killed with a hammer inside her home in Lakewood in 1984.
What is the possibility that we have a mad hammer killer on the loose?
That's a possibility, and it hasn't been discounted, nor has it been totally confirmed yet either.
That case connected to another case we covered in our Unsolved series.
I hope they find out who did that, who murdered my kids for no reason.
A week after Patricia's murder, someone entered a home in Aurora and bludgeoned Bruce and Deborah Bennett, their 7- and 3-year-old girls, with a hammer, killing everyone but the 3-year-old. Those 2 cases remain unsolved for more than 3 decades. But a break in the case came in 2018 when DNA was uploaded to the FBI's federal database, linking this man, Alex Ewing, to the murders of the Bennett family and Patricia Louise Smith. In 2022, 38 years after the murders, he was found guilty and will spend the rest of his life in prison. In 2018, we covered another story about a Jane Doe from 1993.
Over the decades, investigators have worked to come up with sketches of the victim that they just couldn't identify.
This case has not been solved yet, but in 2020, new DNA technology helped investigators finally identify her as Rebecca Rediker, giving her family a bit of closure. No justice, as a killer in this case has yet to be found. Other cases we've covered, like Connie Paris, Nani Dotson, Marilee Burt, Vicki Carpenter, Richard Van Dyne, Nick Kunzelman, and Stephanie Hart-Griselle, remain unsolved, leaving these families with no closure or justice. DNA technology advancements are helping detectives close the book on some of those cold cases that have left loved ones looking for closure and justice for a very long time. That technology has come a long way in recent years, and part of the reason is you.
We never thought that the technology was going to come this far.
If anyone knows how far DNA technology has come, it's Yvonne Woods.
I'm a forensic scientist at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab. I've actually been working cold cases for 29 years.
In her nearly 3 decades in the field, she's seen the advancements firsthand.
When DNA first started in the 1980s, you needed about a quarter-size sample of DNA. And the tests took approximately a month to complete. Right now, we only need about 10 cells, and we can turn around in a number of hours.
It's taken decades to get here. In the mid-'80s, the advent of testing someone's DNA using biological matter like blood, semen, and saliva began. In the late 80s, we saw the first person convicted of murder using DNA technology. That happened in the UK. In 1990, CODIS, an acronym for Combined DNA Index System, was developed. This is a national database that stores and compares DNA from any crime scene or offender. In the late 90s, new DNA technology called short tandem repeat, or STR, was created, which helps separate multiple people's DNA, let's say from a sexual assault victim and a perpetrator. And then about 5 years ago, genetic genealogy started playing a big part in solving crimes and cold cases.
We've begun work on approximately 50 genealogy cases in the last 3 years, and we've solved almost half of those. with this new technology.
Well, I handled the first DNA case in Denver in 1989.
Mitch Morrissey is a former Denver district attorney. He turned his passion for justice into a second career.
I am the Chief of Operations of United Data Connect. Most of what we do is called investigative genetic genealogy.
That's comparing DNA from online databases to find anyone related to a person of interest. Morrissey does this job to help those most vulnerable.
About 90% of the crimes we solve with DNA, women are the victims of those crimes. The 10% that are left, it's about 9.5, 9.7 are kids. This is so important because these are violent crimes, rapes and murders, that are committed by men against the women and children in our communities.
I'm just going to tell you, it's not a happy job.
Not happy or easy, and not for anyone seeking instant gratification.
The oldest cold case that I ever worked was just recently solved last year. And I had worked on that case for 28.5 years.
It's a deep desire to help and the search for answers that keeps them going.
I do believe that we provide the information that families have longed for years.
We talked about forensic genetic genealogy. When people hear that, they think of 23andMe or Ancestry.com. However, law enforcement can't use information from those databases. You have to upload your information from those sites to one of two free databases, GEDmatch or Family Tree. Those can connect you to more relatives, but also help investigators link the DNA to victims or suspects, which helps solve more crimes. After the break, we dive into a cold case that's 40 years old. A teenage girl from Idaho Springs abducted and never found, and her sister's dedication to finding answers. Welcome back to Colorado Unsolved. Now we take a look back at a cold case that's 40 years old. Beth Miller was a teenage girl from Idaho Springs, now presumed dead. Investigators think she was abducted and murdered. To this day, nobody knows for sure. Here's former 9 News crime and justice reporter Matt Jablow and photojournalist Tom Cole.
I called Mom, and she told me that Beth was gone, that they couldn't find her, didn't know where she was. She left to go jogging that morning and was never seen again. I decided if they can't find her, I'm going to find her, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do.
In the summer of 1983, Beth Miller was a 14-year-old girl on a mission.
She had been accepted into a varsity basketball program, and she wanted to be in shape.
Family members say every day that summer, Beth left their home in Idaho Springs to go jogging, and every day she returned home, except for the day she didn't, August 16th, 1983.
Since the search for Beth Miller began,
friends say Beth normally went jogging with at least one other person.
I jogged with her a couple of times.
But this time, she went alone.
I'd like to ask everybody if they have seen anything anywhere that might help us locate Beth, to please notify your local law enforcement officers.
When Beth's parents reported her missing, a massive and well-publicized search was launched in the air and on the ground.
Around 100 people from Idaho Springs and Clear Creek County are assisting in the effort. Even a few on horseback have joined in.
Despite all that, Beth's body was never found, but the investigation continued and continued and continued.
I would ask my parents, have there been any good leads, or do they know anything more? I didn't know where that was. I've looked all over.
Frustrated with the lack of progress in the case, Beth's older sister, Lynn, eventually decided to take matters into her own hands.
I had to be on the inside. I had to know the leads that were coming in and the tips and just all the information. I wanted to be a cop, and I wanted to be an investigator on Beth's case.
And that's exactly what happened. 8 years after Beth vanished, Lynn became an Idaho Springs police officer and then joined the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Department, where she led the investigation into her sister's disappearance and presumed murder.
I was glad I was the lead investigator, but it really took its toll on me.
Lynn worked on the case for about 7 years and at times thought she was close to solving it.
Absolutely.
We haven't came up with anything promising at this point.
But she says the initial investigation, conducted well before she took over, was so badly bungled that it was impossible to complete the job.
I really think we would know what happened to Beth if it had been investigated correctly.
A 2007 grand jury report about Beth's disappearance appears to bolster Lynn's claims, pointing to documents and statements that were lost or destroyed and jurisdictional disputes that were at fault for slowing and eventually sabotaging the investigation.
I'm still angry. I wish we had been able to finish what we started.
Now retired and living just outside Durango, Lynn says she still thinks about Beth often.
She was just cute. She was nice. She was funny.
A young life lost.
She was just barely 14 years old.
An adult life never lived.
I still wonder if Beth were alive, how many kids would she have? And just what kind of a person would she be?
40 years later, Lynn says she continues to hope that Beth's remains will one day be found.
I believe in God.
And she prays that anyone with any information about what happened to her little sister will come forward while they can.
Please, please, don't take it to your grave. Don't take it with you.
Matt Jablow, 9 News.
Lynn believes she might have solved her sister's case if the initial investigation was better. A 2007 grand jury report about Beth's disappearance pointed to documents and statements that were lost or destroyed and jurisdictional disputes that were at fault for slowing and eventually sabotaging the investigation. After the break, another deep dive into a cold case, this one from 1987, and the detective who was adamant about who killed Peggy. Welcome back. Now we go to a cold case from 1987. It was once considered solved, and a man served nearly a decade in prison for a crime he didn't commit. We talked to the lead investigator, who is now retired. She says this is one of the cases that haunts her to this day.
This is every article that has ever been put out on Peggy Hetrick.
A woman murdered 35 years ago.
I keep them. You know, it's just that I'm possessed with this case, I guess.
A detective haunted by one cold case.
Because someday I keep thinking maybe this is going to be needed.
Boxes and boxes of newspaper clippings and investigative work remain in her basement, with the hope that one day this case will be solved.
He's still out there.
In 1987, Peggy Hetrick was 37 years old. She was on her way home from a bar in Fort Collins when she was stabbed to death. Detective Linda Wheeler Holloway was one of the first on scene.
There was blood in the curb. There was a cigarette butt, I remember, that was laying in the blood. Peggy's body was out in the, about 100 feet out into the field.
Police had several people of interest, though one got more attention than the others.
I think Fort Collins got so tunnel visioned on Tim Masters.
Tim Masters, a 15-year-old kid at the time. 12 years went by while detectives built their case around him. Then, in 1999, Masters was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Linda says she always doubted he was the killer.
It was all very complicated.
Then in 2007, after Masters had already served 8 years in prison, DNA is found on Peggy's clothing that didn't belong to him.
I had told him clear back then that I thought they were on the right track, and now we had some DNA.
That new evidence was found using groundbreaking technology that can detect skin cells on clothing.
Fortunately, the evidence had been preserved enough by Fort Collins. It's one of those moments, like 9/11, when I get a call from them and go, "We've got a full match." And I went, "Oh my goodness, that's the ex-boyfriend." They were breaking up. They were together that night. They had a little spat that night. And it's like, They said, well, he's on her. And I went, oh my goodness.
Tim Masters was exonerated. All charges were dropped and he was released from prison. And Peggy's murder was listed unsolved once again.
But I feel that there's enough DNA that's not explained in suspicious places.
And Linda is convinced she knows who the killer is.
I'm very upset that DNA and the fact that there was more DNA that I feel as a homicide investigator is enough for number one, probable cause for an arrest warrant, number two, to take it to trial.
Now she hopes she's kept these boxes for all these years for a reason.
I'm hoping that people like you in interest of the public will force the hand of the powers that be in law enforcement and reopen this case. I can't put it away because I feel like if it ever died, that there's no chance of justice.
After Tim Masters' conviction was vacated, he filed civil lawsuits against the city of Fort Collins and Larimer County. Larimer County agreed to pay Masters $4.1 million. The city of Fort Collins agreed to pay Masters $5.9 million. Masters and Linda Wheeler Holloway remain close to this day. After the break, we dive into a cold case more than 50 years old, the unsolved murder of a young mother in Denver, and why her family's hope for answers is up against a bitter reality. Welcome back to Colorado Unsolved. There are dozens of cases from the 70s of women being murdered that are still unsolved despite new DNA technology and families' pleas for answers. One of those women was Stanley Anita Moore. 9 News investigative reporter Kevin Vaughn has her story.
As long as we're living, we are going to be asking questions.
Questions about the unsolved murder of Stanley Anita Moore. Stanita to her family and her sister, Sandra Fisher.
My mother and dad, they tried to find out something before they passed away, and that they didn't do it.
Stanita was killed December 13th, 1971.
So in our lifetime, we would like to have this case solved.
But after 50 years of frustrations, it may be too late.
I didn't get to know her, and I wish I could have.
Too late for Shandell Hornbuckle in her crib when a killer strangled her mom.
I sad for that little girl that lost her mother. I wished I'd have got to grow with her.
Too late for Stephen Moore, one of Stanita's brothers.
It became a frustrating subject for me. Whenever people would talk to me about it, I'd like, what do you know that she don't know, that my sister Sandra doesn't know?
Well, I think we can say all cold cases are challenging.
Retired Arapahoe County Sheriff's Detective Bruce Isaacson worked old unsolved murders for a decade.
Even if it's been a long time, there's still family members that want to find out what happened to their mom or their sister or their granddaughter.
Stanita is one of dozens of women killed in the 1970s whose cases remain unsolved.
As time moves on, it sometimes damages the case. Evidence gets misplaced or damaged. People's memory fades with time.
In many, obstacles stand in the way of answers. It was an era of detectives working without gloves and sometimes haphazard record keeping and evidence storage.
I tried not to judge. They did the best they could and move forward from that.
This is her graduation picture.
Stanita's family had a very different experience. There was a dispute involving investigators and another sibling.
The police kind of got a restraining order, I think, against us, but we weren't trying to do any harm. We were just trying to find out what really happened to her.
More recently, a struggle to get answers from police.
They said there was a fire at the police station and all her information had been destroyed.
After 52 years, I'm 52 now, and I just found out about a fire, so that really makes my hopes would just go.
This week, Denver police confirmed to 9 Wants to Know that the original case file is missing.
It doesn't seem like they really did a lot to try to bring this to justice. At the time, I didn't consider color. And I was just worried about her and finding out who did it.
Because she was a black lady down in the 70s. Did they not care? And they just swept it under the rug.
It leaves Chandel feeling
like nobody, like she was nobody, I'm nobody. I would like for somebody to come forward so she can rest and I can rest.
that may be the only hope.
The missing case file, combined with haphazard crime scene preservation and the fact that 50 years has gone by, means the odds are stacked against this family ever getting answers about what happened to Stanley Anita Moore. Kevin says it would take a new witness coming forward with new details or a confession all these years later for this case to potentially be solved. You can find more details, past stories we've done on these cold cases, and newspaper clippings on our website, 9news.com. You can also get more information about how to register through one of those DNA databases, so hopefully more of these cold cases get solved before time runs out. I'm Corey Rose with this special report for 9 News.